the victim of the problem is actually the best person to be the CEO because they have the knowledge, right? And then the person with the money, they're bringing money. So I think in the future, we're going to have like a really solid team of different people bringing different skills and resources that will go a long way in also solving these problems themselves.
My guest today is Darlene Damm, who is the Fellow for Impact for Singularity University. Darlene, welcome. It's so great to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
So Darlene has a phenomenal background in impact. She's worked with organizations like the World Food Program. She was 9 years with Ashoka and our friend Bill Drayton. Worked with the Asia Society, U.S. Indonesia Society. She's co-founded two exponential startups, and of course her work with for years with Singularity University, and we'll be talking about a variety of these different roles. But I'd love to just walk back to young Darlene. What were you curious about when you were young? What drove your fascinations and sort of started you on this path?
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in a very rural, small community, 2,000 people, 5-hour drive to any sort of civilization or city. And I think that had a big impact on just how I thought about the world. I think during that time, I realized like there are a lot of different factors that influence people that can make your life go really well, or you can present a lot of challenges. And so I was always interested in these big questions, like how do you help people? How do you address human suffering? I would see people when they were kids doing really well and something would happen and things would go really bad. And so I just developed this empathy of how do we help people? I also happened to live next door to a really, really old man. When I was like 4, there was this 90-year-old man, and he was the assistant to Esther and Robert Goddard, who invented the first liquid-filled rockets in the US. So before I'd gone to school, before anyone told me about what jobs you could have, this neighbor was like, yeah, we built the first rockets to go to the moon.
Yeah.
They didn't make it then.
So you immediately were exposed to something that was rocket science.
Yeah, and big ideas, and that you can do anything. And my grandfather worked on the Apollo missions too. So I was driven by how do you help people and what is our universe? Yeah.
And then so you ended up studying at Stanford. You got a BA in cultural and intellectual history. What is that?
Yes,
Help us understand what that is and why that was a fascination to you.
Yeah. So I initially went into Stanford as a physics major and struggled with the math. And so I thought I was trying to figure out the laws of like matter and how the universe works, but it was in a language that I didn't feel comfortable in. And history was more of what are sort of the laws of how human societies exist, and which I felt was just as important. But then as I delve into history, you start finding that how someone writes history or who is allowed to write the history depends on these other things that are happening at the time. So cultural and intellectual history is like looking at those bigger things that are happening in the world that sort of shapes how history is written. So that's what I focused on.
Normally by the winners, I've heard.
Yes, normally by the winners. What else is happening, and how does what's happening in science impact what's happening in literature?
And so then you talked about systems thinking, and so is that then you got a master's in international affairs from Johns Hopkins, and was it that sort of systems context that was interesting to you, or what was it about international perspective that was helpful?
Yeah, so I think because I was in such an isolated town, I was always curious about the world. Like I literally would write letters. I had pen pals around the world, but no travel, no interaction with people from other countries. So when I got to Stanford, I was super interested in international relations, and I had some summer jobs hosting both students and diplomats from Asia, from the first group of diplomats from Vietnam that came to the US after we opened our relations. I worked with them when I was like 18. And then the next couple summers, I took summer jobs working in Vietnam and Indonesia and different parts of Asia.
And so did that help you to just see the differences in cultures, and especially how you think of just the impact of opening these economies and providing more economic benefit. And because, I mean, you were on the ground a number of different places. That's a lot of exposure to different cultures.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it was exposure to different cultures, seeing different ways people lived, but also those experiences taught me that like a little bit of effort can make a huge difference. So when I went to Vietnam back in the late 90s, most people said, Darlene, don't go there. You can't fix anything. We were at war with that country. But then, I went there and that country, the economy completely changed. The relationships with the US changed. And I felt like I was a part of that, even though it was a small part. So I learned this lesson very young that a lot of people will say that you can't change things, that nothing will change. And I was like, that's not true. But you have to actually go and see things.
And if you don't go, if you don't try, yes, nothing's going to change.
Exactly.
So it's just the belief that there is a problem that could be tractable.
Yeah.
Then understanding those communities and the needs of those communities and understanding their lived experience and empowering them to be part of the solution is
Yes.
is actually a big part of the formula.
Yes. Yes. And collaborating with people all over the world.
So, what led you to? I don't know if many our listeners know about Ashoka, but Ashoka is the whole idea of that there's a social entrepreneur. There's a person who is going in country, who has an entrepreneurial mindset, is helping people to be able to solve problems. That's something that Ashoka was just built sort of the operating system for and to help people to connect with communities all around the world. So what led you to come to Ashoka?
Yeah. So I think I had done some different trips and work in different communities and felt like, okay, I'm helping 10 people, right? But the root cause of the problem isn't solved. And I remember I came across Ashoka on a website. I was in graduate school at the time and started reading about their methodology. And I was like, 7 hours. I've been sitting here for 7 hours looking at their website. And I knew there's something here. But they really focused on finding people from communities with big social problems that had innovated solutions to the root causes of those problems and were able to scale them across their country and globally. And so I was like, here's the answer, right? People are solving these problems. We just have to support them with that.
And just so people know, some of these are pretty fundamental problems. I mean, access to clean water,
Yeah.
access to energy,
Yeah.
access to good pay for the crops that you grow. I mean, these are very, very pivotal problems in a variety of, especially developing economies. And
Yes.
again, empowering them to be able to come up with these entrepreneurial solutions is critical. And you know that I was involved in the founding of SOCAP, which was the
Yes.
conference to bring a lot of social entrepreneurs together and then figure out, well, how can you do a lot of that stuff and have a profit motive so that it's a sustainable organization?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
So then tell us about the journey to Singularity. So how did you spend 7 hours on their website too and hear about the global studies program, or what was that connection?
So I saw an article in the New York Times about Singularity, actually, in this program they were running to help startups use technology to solve the world's biggest problems. And I had been at Ashoka for about 10 years and felt like technology was starting to change things. And, I was from California and had lived in Silicon Valley and started seeing people are using technology to fundraise. This was like text message money, right now, very common, but back then was transformational. So I applied to Singularity University with sort of two things in my application. One was, how do you use technology to fundraise? And then I also said, would it be possible to crowdsource the building of a spaceship? Just something, that was like back from my 3-year-old
As one
child.
does. Yeah, we,
Yeah,
we all we all wonder about that, right? Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
every one of us.
yeah. So, and initially I was actually rejected from the program and at Singularity and put on the wait list. So I didn't know until the day before the program start that I got in. So also it's just sort of a lesson there that, you have to, there's rejection and then there's trying to jump on opportunities, even if you have to change your whole life in one day.
Oh, you wrote a great piece on leanin.org, just
Yeah.
talking about that inflection point in your life that I would love it. People definitely should read, because I think so many of us go through these transitions, and as we're trying to transform in sort of the next thing, and this sort of push and pull of what we've
Yeah.
been doing versus taking the risks, and you
Yeah.
took the risk. You
Yeah.
drove across the country and went into the program, and so two companies Tell us about how did the first one actually start to come together?
So the mission at Singularity, we were charged with using an exponential technology to solve a problem impacting 1 billion people in 10 years. So that highly constrained. And during that summer, a team of us said, well, can we use these drones that people are using as toys, as weapons, and to make movies in Hollywood? Can we use those to transport goods, particularly healthcare goods? So initially, we spent 10 weeks. Everyone said no. The battery won't last long enough. It's too expensive. Like, no one will want this. And then at the end of those 10 weeks, we pitched the idea and it got picked up on the global news. And then this industry of drone transport was born. So that's sort of the origin story. And then Matternet is still a company that it exists today. It's working in multiple countries around the world and also here in Silicon Valley.
You actually have a patent on the transportation of using a network of unmanned aerial vehicles, is my
Yes.
memory.
And the word Matternet means network of matter. So we intentionally were thinking, what does logistics and transportation look like if it can move matter the same way the internet moves information? And so it was this company that's delivering goods, but it was also this new paradigm of how logistics and transportation can work with all these new exponential technologies and what industries open up from that.
So one of our fellows, of course, is Emmeline Pat Dahlstrom, who is very, very focused on space. And then you focused on this idea of DIY rockets. So
Yes.
tell us about that initiative.
Yeah. So at the time, back in 2011 and 2012, the commercial space industry it was just starting to exist.
And wasn't a thing. Yeah, not a
it wasn't.
thing.
And so I had also been learning about all these new technologies, advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, and was thinking about, like, could you create a company where you had engineers and people all around the world building space technology online remotely? And today there's all types of software and companies that allow that to happen, but none of that existed back then. And so the vision was, how do we create jobs around the world in the space industry and democratize access to space, and also lower the cost by doing things in a new way? And so I put up a competition on the internet, got a couple sponsors, $1,000, and challenged people to build a 3D printed rocket engine, like the design files, which at the time NASA was working on one and some guy in his garage. And so that was just put it on the internet, incorporate a company on LegalZoom, and see what happens. And the competition, it got picked up in the news, and teams from all over the world entered it. And there were the top teams were some students from Canada, aerospace graduate students. And we published the results, and then the top teams were immediately hired by Rocket Lab and Boeing. So I realized, like, this was a great, like, tool for innovation. Competitions can create innovation and new products which people think are impossible. But it wasn't a good idea for a company because everything was just going out into the world. So yeah.
Let's talk about possible futures for impact, because there's a lot of wicked problems in the world. There's going to continue to be a lot of different wicked problems in the world. There's lots of stakeholders. There are communities who need to thrive. There are people who are building organizations. There are nonprofits and NGOs. There are governments. We've just had a big reset in the international aid community. How do you think about, like, just 10 years, 15 years down the road? What are some of the through lines for possible futures for impact? And where do you think a lot of the energy to be able to solve some of the more challenging wicked problems, including some of those in, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, where do you think a lot of that innovation is going to come from?
Yeah. So, like, I see two trends that are driving things. And so one is the technology, right? And exponential technologies, we know that initially they're very expensive, but then they're super cheap. So if you build a product that is cleaning the water, or, producing energy, or creating food with an exponential tech, it'll become affordable and more people can innovate with it. So, like, that's one trend. Like, we're seeing innovators all over the world, like, pop up with companies and solutions because economically you can now. And then the second trend I see going along with it is the team is what will become most important. So, and by that, like, historically, we had this world where sort of wealthy people or rich countries would act in sort of either a charity or funding or investing capacity in poorer regions, right? And there was this huge power imbalance. It's done a lot of good, but there's always been this power imbalance that I think everyone's always been uncomfortable with. And it was actually at Singularity, working there with our teams of innovators, where I started seeing, well, we're starting to think about that differently. So the victim of the problem is actually the best person to be the CEO because they have the knowledge, right? And then the person with the money, they're bringing money, that they don't have control over everything or the best knowledge, right? Then you have the technology, and historically the technology, who could build the technology was very important, but now we have AI helping with it. So I think in the future we're going to have less of these power differences and just have like a really solid team of different people bringing different skills and resources that will go a long way in also solving these problems themselves.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, at the end of Singularity University's executive programs, the 5-day immersives, I do sort of the wrap up talk, and I talk about we often label it not just purpose, not just transformational purpose, but massive transformational purpose (MTPs). I say, well, this is often sort of the intersection. It's like a Venn diagram. So you're talking about the wicked problem, and then you're talking about the team or the way to solve it, and there's a business model that's associated with how to do that. And then there's an exponential technology. And if you put those three together, and you can really workshop that, then you can actually have some pretty big impact. So
Yes.
when you look at the development of a lot of exponential technologies nowadays, and you project 10 years, 15 years down the road, what are the ones you think could have the most impact on impact? Are there any that you would point people today? Say that you're somebody's an innovator in an organization. What would you point people today to be looking at in the kinds of technologies where the puck might be in 10 or 15 years that really you'd want to put time and energy into? Just like 10 years ago, we did say AI.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We're trying to tell a lot of people, hey, really, really put a lot of energy here, because this is where a lot of the innovation is going to come from.
Yeah. So I think two areas that are going to have a big impact 10 years from now that maybe social impact innovators aren't paying enough attention to. One is digital twins. And this is basically, you can create a virtual model of anything, right? So you can make it of a city, an economy, a human heart. And I see that as very powerful because you can run a simulation. If you choose to build something or put money into something, what can you expect? Or so it's just a very helpful tool. And then the other one I think we're not paying enough attention to is biotechnology. So there are people right now who are creating lab grown palm oil, which means we won't have to cut down forests, right, to create palm oil, right? And it'll also change employment. These also so many advances that might impact the diseases that people face, where kids are being cured of rare genetic diseases now, like so much in biotechnology. Yeah.
And then when we think about the wicked problem part, there's obviously the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Singularity has had its own flavor, Global Grand Challenges, the GGCs. Where would somebody wants that you're working in an organization and you're passionate about trying to have some greater impact in the world? Where would you think they'd start? I mean, would they start with falling in love with the problem and especially a wicked problem, some big complicated thing, or would it be engaging with the community, or would it be focusing on a particular technology and its potential applications, or is it all the above?
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed there's in terms of people that I talk with, you have people that love the technology and you have people that hate the technology in terms of social impact. And one thing I want to say is we need both. There are solutions that can be built today that will save lives immediately, that will make things better. But the same trends of exponential technologies that allow sort of these solutions to scale very rapidly can also scale problems very rapidly. So what I want to say is if you're afraid of all that, then go into ethics, go into cybersecurity, go into these other areas that might be limiting the technology. But it's also social impact. But we need both sides of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think it's important to balance. Like, you can fall in love with the technology and then look for something that you want to solve with it. And what's common, and you said this earlier, you don't normally really understand the problem. People who have the lived experience of being in that environment, or they do. And so you want to make sure that that's at least, when you're assembling the right team, that you've
Yeah.
got people that understand that lived experience and really understand the problem. Are there any, if you look at whether it's the global grand challenges or the sustainable development goals, do you see any, 10, 15 years down the road, is there a possible future where there's one or two that you think not solved, but really substantial
Yeah.
advances can have
I
better
mean,
traction on them?
yeah. So, like, in some ways, you can think of some of our problems as related to resources, lack of food, lack of water, lack of healthcare, lack of shelter. And those, I think, we're making a lot of progress in solving. And then in some ways, though, that as we're solving those, Peter Diamandis uses the term abundance. So we're creating enough of these problems that were scarce. But then on the other hand, we're having abundance itself. Abundance itself is the problem, right? There's more movies than you and I can ever watch in our lifetime online. That's not good for our brains. That's exponential tech. There's more unhealthy food than we can ever eat. So I think that we're going to see scarcity problems solved, but then these new problems emerging are related to an overabundance of stuff.
Yeah, a conversation I've had with Peter is we already have abundance.
Yeah.
It's just not evenly distributed, and it's not always beneficial.
Yeah. Or there's too
So,
much. Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah. It's that if there's too much of a good thing,
Yeah.
we all shouldn't be living in candy stores.
Yeah.
And distribution
Yeah.
is like, we might have it here, but they don't have it there. And how do
Yes.
we help them to be able to have, how do we empower them to be
Yes.
able to have their own solutions to that? So I want to come back to some of the possible futures, especially in the context for people who work in organizations, lead in organizations today. And I want to use your book as a jumping off point. So you wrote a book called Your Dream Job is Here, The Impact Technology Revolution and the New
Yeah.
Jobs Saving the World. And so obviously it's a long time. You've got the demo. And obviously, as longtime chair for the future of work, I just every time somebody says that there are ways that these technologies are going to create more meaningful, well-paid work for people in the future, I'm all in. So
Yeah.
help us understand sort of your framing for the book, what drove you to do that, and then how is that useful to people who work in organizations today?
Yeah, yeah. So there are now tons of thousands of startups and companies that are solving social problems as their main job every day. This might be a startup that's working to build technology to detect wildfires. It might be a company that's building filters that go on cargo ships to collect carbon. It might be an ed tech company. It might be a company building atmospheric water harvesters. So you and I have seen these companies over the last 10 years.
Dendro, which came through the SU program, but they do build digital twins using drones, and then they use a heavy-duty drone to seed those
Yeah.
areas. So yes, there's a perfect example
Yeah.
of a company that's doing well and
Yes.
doing good.
Yes. And these are a lot of them. There's not some nonprofits, but most of them are for profit. They'll do very well. But what really surprised me is when I started to try to create an Excel list of all these companies. And after 4 days, I stopped because there were literally tens of thousands of companies. Look at do a Google search on any sort of robots and healthy food. So there is so much happening around the world and it hasn't been documented or named. So part of the book was trying to say we have this impact technology revolution that's happening. But second, it's actually creating wonderful jobs. Like many of these jobs, they pay very well. They offer stock and equity. They give you benefits. They give you access to education. This might be true if you're the vice president, and it might be true if you're the janitor. So it's like this model sort of the startup tech company is kind of spreading around the world. And some of these are very high risk and some of them are lower risk. Some are big companies, some are small. But I really wanted people to know that these jobs exist. So the first part of the book is just explaining that in, jobs in education, environment, healthcare, all the social problems. And then the second part is, okay, so how do I get into those jobs based on where I am in my life now? Yeah.
So it's very inspirational. I think one of the main takeaways for me
Yeah.
from the book is that people often have this sort of mindset around that impact is often a thing to be done later. Like, okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
make my money, and then I'll maybe after I retire, I'll volunteer in the local food bank, or I'll donate or that sort of thing. So what I want people to be infected by the possibilities are is if you actually can conceive of an organization that can do well and do good. First off, it's important to remember the majority of new employment comes from companies that are less than 5 years old.
Mhm.
Existing big companies just don't hire a lot of new people. So,
Yeah.
so economic growth, especially in developing economies, is going to come from those small entrepreneurs. And secondly, if you can conceive of a wicked problem that you want to be able to try to help solve and an exponential technology you can apply, you just got to be a better entrepreneur than the one that's trying to start a nonprofit, because the nonprofit one, you're on life support. You've got to keep on getting somebody to keep on donating to you. But
Yeah.
here, you're trying to have this positive impact in the world. You've just got to come up with a really good, profitable business model. But if you do, you are sustainable. You
Yeah.
actually have built a glide path into a possible future.
Yes. Yeah. And this is true in California, in Nepal, in South Africa, in Switzerland. Everywhere you look, these companies are popping up. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you're working, let's say you're talking to somebody who's working in a large organization. And I
Yeah.
know this is something that Singularity University is uniquely good at, is inspiring people. You've got an existing job, and then they're at a crossroads, or they're just fascinated by exponential technologies. And so
Yeah.
they come to SU. How do you help them to understand some of the ways that they can treat that as an inflection point, and maybe even get their current organization to
Yeah.
change its approach, or to, you were talking about bigger companies, they're not leveraging exponential technologies, but a great example of a company that does well and does good is Patagonia. In
Yeah.
meetings in Patagonia, they just literally donated the company to the planet.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
now owned by a conservancy for the planet.
Yeah.
And in meetings, many of the people who lead in the organization, they start the meetings by saying, "What have we done for the planet this week?"
Yeah.
So, and that can be done in the context of business. So, what are some of
Yeah.
the things you would help people to think about in your
Yeah.
current job, in your current organization, ways you can be able to lay that groundwork for that better possible future?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one thing is I think about impact pretty broadly. So you might be working, say, for a satellite company that is using their data to detect wildfires to help villages that have been devastated by landslides. Or so there's some companies that are doing very direct targeted work on impact, and then there's others where it's kind of mixed. Some companies actually are doing impact and don't know it. So maybe you have a rideshare company, but like, did you ever track, well, how many times is somebody getting to the hospital who maybe couldn't before, or being able to go to work now? And so I think impact is happening all the time. Sometimes it might be I'm saving someone's life, or just saving a whole community from burning down. And other times it might be I've helped somebody in sort of this incremental way, and we might not know the impact until 10 years. So first thing I would do is actually look at what you're doing now. If you build software to help people file their taxes, is that social impact? Some people would say, no, you need to be like making sure a starving child has food, right? But I think it's important to actually like think broadly about it and kind of document where you are now and what you really want to do in your life and where do you want to contribute. And also, are you doing something that's causing harm that maybe you're overlooking? And is it okay to overlook that? So that's the first thing, just mapping out how impact is or isn't happening at your organization. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then I would just add, so, and often, especially larger organizations, they have a lot of assets, and there can be new ways to think about leveraging them. So Coca-Cola was one of the first companies years ago to focus on what was called a mindset called mission brands. And they realized, in Africa, we're delivering, you got a lot of delivery trucks, and they're going all over, and they're delivering liquids in the form of soda. Well,
Yeah.
couldn't you deliver clean water too? And
Yeah.
so that they leveraged that supply chain network
Yeah.
to be able to get more clean water into some of the communities that those trucks would pass through. And so if you
Yeah.
think of those assets that your organization has, maybe they're reuses or other uses. And it could be that those are profitable opportunities. They might just make less money, but
Yeah.
in other economies where that's okay. And then
Yeah.
it can also create employment for people in
Yes.
those economies that can actually help to be able to lift them.
Yeah. I feel like we need a whole new field of like the economics of social impact. And so like I read that the company that builds Ozempic or creates Ozempic has a huge foundation, and they invest that money into healthcare in low income countries and sustainability. And that money is dramatically increased because people are buying this. So now you have a pharmaceutical company doing impact work, but they're also a drug maker. So like when you start getting into this, it becomes the question of what is impact. You can kind of get lost in a maze if you of different ways to think about it. And yeah,
But I would warrant that actually is another opportunity.
yeah,
So, I mean, we keep on coming up with
yeah,
these problems and then, okay, let's treat them as
yes,
opportunities.
yes,
Data, one of
yeah, yeah,
the things that has bedeviled the impact arena for a very long period of time is, this is especially true with foundations, is
yeah,
if I put $1 here or $1 there, how do
yeah,
I know? And a lot of times people want that to be very linear. But the truth is, if you are working in collaboration with a community
yeah,
and the community has goals and you
yeah,
understand what those goals are, you're not just telling them what you think they need to have. You're
yeah,
helping them to focus on the goals that they care the most about. You're helping them to co-create those
yeah,
solutions, and
yeah,
then they need to be the judges of the benefits that they are receiving. And so this is an opportunity for better data. You're
yes,
talking about digital twins. The more
yes,
you can
and
instrumentize a lot of the physical resources in a country, for instance, you can actually understand if you're
yeah,
doing water conservation, is it actually having a positive impact? So you have more water to be able to
yeah,
distribute in other places. And so these
yeah,
are also great opportunities, which could also be great
yeah.
business.
And it comes back to the idea of the team too. Who knows what's best? The community knows what's best, right? And one group is providing resources, right? So, but then there's other dynamics. So like, how do we have like a team, a truly empowered team that's equally able to lead these initiatives, work on these problems? Yeah.
And how have you seen? Is there a process or operating system for assembling those teams, or is that again? This is another problem to solve.
Yeah.
Is how do you find the best mix of skill sets and
Yeah.
the people to be able to all agree on the problem to be solved, and then to be able to build an organization to do that?
Yeah. I mean, well, that's why I love Singularity and the program to start companies so much. It was like bring 80 people together into a room for 10 weeks and see what naturally emerges and what teams emerge. So, but that's a way to work with startups proactively, helping people who've identified they care about problems and then empowering them. But I think more broadly, this is kind of happening naturally as the technology spreads. It's spreading power, it's spreading who can be an innovator. And so we're seeing this happen also organically around the world.
And it's also something that I think even people in large organizations, there are some pretty good examples where rather than having to have this big organization, somebody falls in love with a problem to solve, and then they've got to go and they've got to leave and do the startups. Google, for instance, has had a great program where internal entrepreneurs see a problem. It isn't core to the company's business, but that still sounds like it's a pretty good solution. And they would literally start the startup still working in the same offices and find the team from other people. And then that could create, the next product.
Yeah.
Google had this whole process called 20% time, where
Yes.
a lot of engineers could spend a week just thinking deep thoughts about customer needs. And of course, that's how we have things like Gmail
Yeah.
and Google Apps. Those
Yeah.
came from 20% time where people were thinking about how can I create something new, some new value for our customers. And you could be
Yeah.
doing the same thing with impact inside large organizations.
And if you switched like corporate giving and corporate philanthropy actually into spinning out an entity. So maybe a company donates year 1 and 2, they help a project get off the ground, but then that's spun into a new startup where the philanthropic group and the company and the employees all have equity in it. So you're taking away that power structure once the company's able to live on its own, right? So there's all kinds of models.
Well, absolutely. And this is you both with you talking about your book with the new jobs that are created, and me talking a lot about sort of how that changes a lot of the dynamics of what the future organization could look like. We're going to have a lot of different innovations that can
Yeah.
make that organizations can be much more like a portfolio of these
Yes.
kinds of functions. And
Yes.
and if you think about how you, as somebody in an existing organization, what you really want to do is you want to find that problem to fall in love with, and then see, is there a great connection between what your
Yeah.
organization could do to both do well and do good to have an impact on
Yeah.
that problem?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is if people need to think about their own lives. What are the biggest
Yeah.
problems in your life? There's the problem that you're the expert in, right? So if all of us just like proactively, saw our problems as like opportunities to innovate around and create solutions, that would be amazing.
So, last question for you, Darlene. So we talked about young Darlene. Now let's talk about future you, future
Yeah.
Darlene. And so it's the year 2035, and you wake up. Let's say it's on a Saturday. What is that life like in 10 years, and especially in the context of impact? How do you think the arena of impact has changed, and for you, what is life in the year 2035?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of our resource problems will be closer to being solved, and that it's going to be these other problems that have more to do with how society works, how people interact with each other. So I feel like at that point, it's going to be sort of this different set of social impact problems to solve.
And because we've kind of ignored the topic of AI,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
there a role for some of these technologies, you think, in how we're thinking about and approaching impact, and especially helping people to collaborate around impact in that possible future?
Yes, yes. I mean, I think a lot of robotics and AI will be ubiquitous throughout all of our lives. And it's really like, how do we design that integration with these technologies? I think that's going to be a huge thing that determines like if we have a positive future, maybe not so good future on there.
But let's make sure we're all contributing to that positive future.
Exactly. That's the thing. Like I went from a history major into technology, though I didn't belong there. I didn't have the right academic degree or anything to be doing that, but I thought this topic is so important. I have to. And I feel like all of us now, even, we all need to get involved and build the world we want, whether we feel we're qualified to, we know how to do it. Like no one knows what's going on right now. So if someone is trying to make the world a better place, now's the time to start working on these issues because that's gonna matter 10 years from now.
What a great note to end on. So Darlene, it's always a masterclass for me to understand your perspective on impact and hear about all the things that you've accomplished in that arena. So I really appreciate all your time and perspective, and I really hope that people will take this as an opportunity to be able to look for the ways that they can weave impact into their own possible futures as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you too. I mean, you've devoted your life to this topic in different ways and you've created so much in our world that has mattered.
We're all toiling in the same field. So, all right, be well.
Okay, thanks.